My name is Jeremy, and this is Good Beer Matters.
We have always been surfers and would visit Central America. We saw where it was going in the US, and we weren't sure that we wanted to jump into that rat race, if you will. Why be the 4,000th when we could be the first? It's known for its Pura Vida lifestyle. It was really about seeking adventure and a fulfilled life.
It's a dream to spend the day doing the activities you love with the people you love. Then cap it all off with a great conversation, a meal, and a very good beer. My next guest tells a story of his pursuit of this dream and creating this experience for his guests. We find great experiences at the intersection of craft and culture. These are the stories of us, of great food and the beer that brings it all together. For the craft and culture of beer, this is episode 126 of Good Beer Matters with Matthew Greenberg of Cerveceros del Mar. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Good Beer Matters podcast. This one is going to be particularly fun for me as my next guest and I were chatting offline. We are born of the same cloth. We live in the same human habitat of just doing cool things and spending time in the water and around beer. So, Matt, I'm just going to say it. I am stoked to have you on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, for anyone who is not familiar with Nicaragua Craft Beer Co. or even Papagayo, tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with kind of where we are today and in terms of, what our company is up to. And then if you want, we can get in the time machine and go back and start from the beginning of, tell the story of how
Absolutely,
we got here.
but first we need a sense of place, and then we'll go back and hear the origin.
For sure. So basically, I run Cerveceros Del Mar Holdings, which is a company that owns and operates two breweries, both based in Central America. The first one is Nicaragua Craft Beer Co. and the Cerveceria San Juan del Sur, which was the first ever brew pub and actually craft brewery altogether in Nicaragua. And from there, we launched an export brand that is present in the US now in 18 states. And then after that, we launched another brand and brewery, which is a production facility, vertically integrated, wholesale, and also retail in Costa Rica called Papagayo Brewing. So they're distinct brands that are both really built to be true to their place of origin, and those places are Nicaragua and Costa Rica.
Well, and you obviously do distribute at least one brand that I've seen up to the U.S. because I've gotten a hold of the Panga Drops Keller Pills in the 8-ounce can, tiny little can.
Yep.
Um, and so if anyone's out there looking for it, it can be found, and I'm not sure exactly where you distribute. You can fill us in on that, but tell me about that little 8-ounce can.
Yeah. So the little can was really born in the tropical heat, where your last few ounces of a 12-ounce can, or God forbid, a 16-ounce can, are just going to be boiling by the time you get to drinking them. So it's actually a pretty popular format for soft drinks in that part
Yeah.
of the world, Central America, areas closer to the equator. So when we launched that product in the US in 2017, it was a very in our minds underutilized style that could help differentiate us in a very crowded US beer market. But more importantly, again, be true to the place of origin in Nicaragua, where that format is quite functional. And I think it's actually pretty functional in the US as well. When you're on a boat or on whatever golf course or walking in the park, or you name it, and your last few ounces get a little gross in the afternoon sun.
Yeah.
That's not happening. So yeah, it was a cool project for us to be able to bring that to the US.
Well, and I like the idea, and granted, granted, I'm speaking to everyone around the world, but most people know that the U.S. is known for we want things that are bigger. We like
Yeah,
big trucks, big this, big that, and right on. And so the idea of a smaller beer, at first glance, just seems like wait, that doesn't make any sense. But to your point, if you have this in a the southwest of the US or Florida or somewhere tropical, it's your drinks they start condensing if there's humidity in the air, it start warming up in your hand, and so there's that whole aspect of I want to drink it while it's cold, and which is fantastic. But there's another aspect to that too that I really love is it almost helps automatically pace your drinking so you can keep on drinking without going too far, and it's reminiscent of my experience in Spain where they have cañas, the
that's
five
right.
or 6 ounce
That's right.
drinks where it's where you're throwing them back and then you get another one and it's fresh and you throw it back
Yeah.
another one, it's fresh, right? Is that kind of what you're going for?
Totally, totally. Another adaptation of that that we see is like the liter bottles where people will get them to share amongst, five or six
Okay.
people. So it'll be like one large liter bottle come out of the fridge cold. It'll then be poured into five or six glasses, of course, cold because it's just been poured, and crushed pretty quickly. So I think, depending on the angle that you're approaching this from, it can either allow you to have a more kind of approachable drink that you can enjoy, on your own at your own pace, which could be slower. But also, some people who are more into the volume view them as just like super crushable as well, which is also fun. So I think um, yeah, there's a value proposition for a couple different angles there, depending on how you like to drink beer.
Yeah. And if I'm going for volume, then, the problem is easily solved by just having one in the chamber ready to fire, It's
Correct,
just it's
correct.
like just having a little small bucket full of ice and it's like your beer is always going to be cold. You just have to go through the trouble of opening yet another one is not
That
that big a
that's
deal.
right. Yeah, that's right. One of our kind of main pieces of POS for the US market is the bucket for that reason,
Yeah.
because it's pretty fun to get eight of them on ice, plopped on your table.
Yeah. Because you when you just see that we drink with our eyes first and you see this bucket full of small beers thinking, "Oh, I can't wait. This is going to be great."
Yeah,
That's just
yeah,
right
totally,
off the bat. Um,
totally.
So tell us, we talked about this a minute ago. Let's go back and talk about the origin. I mean,
Yeah,
who were you before beer, and how did you end up in this beer and in that place of the world?
yeah. So basically, the we started the brewery, my partners and I. Well, actually, 10 years ago to the month, we moved to Nicaragua, to open the first brew pub. But before that, we were basically college students, and we had always been interested in beer. One of my founding partners and I had worked at Cisco Brewers in Massachusetts as a summer job when we were in school. He was on the production side, and I was on the kind of more of the sales and business development side. And always liked it, always knew that we were entrepreneurial and wanted to start our own business. But I think like a lot of people when they graduate from school, kind of went for the first kind of safe thing that was
Yeah,
available to us, which was, in my case, something pretty far from where I ended up. It was working in insurance in New York, and I was writing insurance for financial institutions, and slowly dying in a cubicle. And
I was just say that probably drove you to beer, one way or
yeah,
the other.
exactly, exactly. So we were we have always been surfers, and would visit Central America at least once a year to go on a surf trip, and so we had some familiarity with the region. And one of those the a trip that we took after I started that job in New York was to Costa Rica and to Nicaragua on the same trip. So we flew to Costa Rica. We rented a car. We drove to the coast and we worked our way up the coast surfing until we got to Nicaragua. We crossed the border and we checked out what Nicaragua had to offer as well. And when we were in Costa Rica, we saw that the craft beer scene was really beginning to emerge. This was 10 years ago in 2014 at a time when the US craft beer business was really exploding. The market that is. And I think it was at that time there were about 3,000 craft breweries in the US. And just a few years later, there were like 10,000. So that was
Yeah.
kind of right on the crest of that insane boom that happened in the U.S. So while we were interested in craft beer, we also knew that we saw where it was going in the U.S. and we weren't sure that we wanted to jump into that rat race, if you will. Um, and then after seeing what was happening in Costa Rica, um, where there seemed to be a few brands that were doing pretty well, the wheels started turning that this could be a really cool opportunity. So then when we crossed the border to Nicaragua and we got to a country that was, let's say, like what we viewed as like the second inning of the tourism development, curve, and there were no craft breweries, we said, why be the 4,000th or the 10th when we could be the first?
Yeah.
And went back to our desk job, started working on the business plan during our lunch breaks. And 10 months after that trip, having quit our jobs, raised some seed money, moved to Nicaragua to open the country's first craft brewery.
That's that's incredible, and I have to say I love hearing that story, and I have heard that story a couple times before because there are a lot of really awesome places. I think again offline, you and I were talking about Jordan Gardenhire, who opened up Baja Brewing in Cabo, and kind of a similar thing. It's just you go on a trip and you think, oh my gosh, how can I live here the rest of my life? And
Totally.
and but so few people have the wherewithal, the courage. I don't want to talk down upon upon this, but so few people will take that step. But
Right.
you're one of the ones who did. You're going to upend what we're supposed to do. You graduate college, you get a big job working for corporate, then you get married, then you have 2.3 kids. It's like you follow. There are few of us who want to avoid that formula and create their own destiny, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. We kind of knew from I guess a relatively early age that we wanted to live and seek fulfilling lives, and at that time, um, whatever it was telling us that the way to be most fulfilled was to do something different and do something that really spoke to our hearts and to our passions, and moving to a place like Nicaragua was extremely exciting and checked all of those boxes, and also seemingly a great business opportunity. So that was enough at 24 years old to feel convinced to take a plunge like that. And what I think what a lot of people told me back then in terms of seeking advice, especially a professor I had from college who ended up being very influential in my life, was that these decisions, to your point, Jeremy, don't get any easier the older you get, because you have more things that, um, right, not talking down on them, rightfully ground you, and limit your decision making filters, right, or add filters to your decision making process. And at that age, there weren't many of them, so it was a perfect time to buy a one way ticket and raise some money and take the plunge.
Yeah, it's harder when you have kids, when you have debt, when you have a house or mortgage or whatever that is. It's harder to burn the boats and buy that one way ticket and figure it out. But
Yeah.
kudos to you for doing that. I do want to tap my foot on the space real quick because I would
Hmm.
imagine I'm thinking it. I'm sure other people are thinking this as well. Talk to us about I think most of us, especially in the world that we occupy with water sports and beer and everything else, are somewhat familiar with Costa Rica from that standpoint. But we talk about both that and Nicaragua as far as the political situation, the safety for travelers, and please address that.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, Both very, very safe places to visit as a tourist. I will say there's a distinction between Nicaragua and Costa Rica in terms of what's gone on in the last 30 and even 10 years in terms of political stability. Nicaragua has definitely been through a couple ups and downs in regards to that. There was the Contra War that ended in the late 80s, early 90s.
Hmm.
And the U.S. actually played a role on the losing side with that, which I think gave Nicaragua I'd say like a bad name, but like a name that has prevented a lot of Americans from viewing it as a safe place to visit.
Well,
Um,
there's a
and
big question mark there for
right,
anyone
and that
interested.
yeah, and that was certainly true, for a while. But beginning in, let's say, the early 2000s, the country really began um, standing out as an international destination that was like not so Americanized and ruined by some of the things that happen when you're too far on the other side of that spectrum. And not to point any fingers at any specific locations, but certainly there are some places in Mexico and even Costa Rica that I think um, uh, people have been to that feel more like Florida than any other Latin American country. So, and there are some things that are in Nicaragua's case that were really great about that situation, both in the early 2000s, both as a tourist but also as an entrepreneur. So as that momentum continued to grow, into 2014, there's this country that is literally exploding as a newfound tourist destination, and has relative stability and safety for tourists. It was almost like it was almost like a new frontier, and as an American, in terms of places to go and have a cool experience. So there was since then, however, there was a blip in that stability in 2018. There was a revolution that resulted in a good amount of violence within the country. No foreigners were ever harmed during this. This was a very tense situation within the country and certainly affected life there. And our business for 18 months or so. But happy to report that things have stabilized again, and it's a really it's thriving as a tourist destination, and for good reason, because it's a really, really beautiful place where you can have again an authentic experience that has not been let's say overly Americanized. And then on
Yeah.
the other hand, Costa Rica has been an extremely kind of stable place to visit as an American for decades. It has no military. It's known for its Pura Vida lifestyle. And I think, actually COVID was a great example of how safe and stable it is, because it was one of the first countries that Americans started going to internationally, and Europeans and Canadians as well, internationally when restrictions started to get lifted, because it's always been viewed as a really kind of safe place with a good healthcare system, and relatively easy to get to as well.
Yeah, and the reports that I've heard from people who've been there, and I haven't been there yet, but that Costa Rica is no longer a secret. There's lots of great places to go. The next question I want to ask you about, but it kind of addresses this in Costa Rica, is the infrastructure is
Yeah.
there, and for those people who want to travel to somewhere tropical and coastal, we don't necessarily want to rough it, even though we know
Right.
we're leaving the U.S. But I mean, there's
Sure.
healthcare considerations, there's activity considerations for both travelers and expatriates.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true completely. I mean, the infrastructure in Costa Rica is outstanding. There are countless, really, really nice hotels and resorts. The roads are good. You don't have to bump around in a four-wheel drive vehicle to get to where you're going unless you want to. And if you do want to, you still can. The surfing, fishing, diving, hiking, um, bird watching, you name it, is all like incredibly world class and just beautiful. There's a one particular part of the country where I think it's like a 10-mile square area, there's 1% of the entire world's biodiversity, which is just staggering, and it speaks to um, how good Costa Rica is at conservation as well, because it has been on the radar for international travel for a long time due to
Yeah.
these reasons that we're talking about, but it hasn't been destroyed either. And that's a testament to the Costa Rican government and the people who really value the natural beauty, and again the Pura Vida like lifestyle that they're fortunate enough to have there.
So I'm going to kind of I'm going to use that as a pivot point, switch gears a little bit because
Yeah,
it's the second
yeah,
time you've mentioned it on your Nicaragua craft beer site. You talk about the tranquilo lifestyle, or in Costa Rica,
yeah,
the pura vida. What is that
yeah.
exactly for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah, well, I think it can mean different things to different people, but it's really about enjoying the place that you're in and get stepping away. I think from some of the rat race that's associated with life in a lot of other places, and frankly can exist there if you if you make it so. But yeah, really again about enjoying the natural beauty and the surroundings and the like-minded people that you're there with. There's just so many nice things that you can do there that get you outside and get you kind of living in a healthy and sustainable way, for again whatever that means to you. um, that it's pretty hard to resist.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar with, the aloha spirit, or other mentalities, or the slower lifestyle in different countries, like Spain or something like that, where some people still take their afternoon siesta because that's part of just like slowing down and recharging, and just really being mindful and present and enjoying your surfing, your bird watching, and tasting your phenomenal beer. It's we can slam it or we can taste it and enjoy it. The choice is yours.
Totally. No, that's exactly right. It's all about living with balance.
Absolutely. So speaking of, tell us a little bit more about the brewery itself and the pub, the Nicaragua craft beer, and we'll talk about Papagayo in a minute.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, when we first started the project, there were no craft breweries in Nicaragua. So that presented a great opportunity, to kind of define the space, define the market almost. And it also presented challenges because there were no uh, avenues that had been cut yet to do things like import brewing equipment, or access brewing ingredients, or have the right professional services that you can need to build a brewery. So all of that we kind of had to do ourselves, and it started with importing the equipment and the government not knowing what tax code to apply to it because nobody knew what brewing equipment was there. So, it was in the end, we got this great tourism tax incentive that again speaks to the tourism growth in Nicaragua. And import duties are quite high, in a lot of countries in Latin America, and without this tourism tax incentive, and basically this was an incentive designed by the government to promote the types of businesses that support tourism. So hotels, guide services, and in our case, breweries. And that would change our import duty from, like, let's say 50% of the value of the equipment, which is a ton,
Hmm.
to about 8 or 10%. So that's very meaningful on any budget, let alone a startup budget. So we went off to trying to get that incentive applied, and because the government didn't know what craft breweries were, we literally had to create you know presentations and go into the government buildings and explain to a room of people what a craft brewery was. um, and as a result, hopefully get this tax exemption. It worked out, but it also resulted in our equipment getting held at the port for about 6 months while we were doing this convincing. Um, so that was a unique challenge. And then we finally got the tanks in, and the truck couldn't drive down the street of the brewery because the power lines were too low. So we had to get a forklift to lift a smaller forklift into our building. Then the larger forklift would drive down the street, grab one of the tanks, drive it back up the street, drop it up the step, into the brewery, where the second forklift would pick it up, drive across the floor, lift it up on the second floor, and install it. So, things like that, I could go on for hours, but a lot of unique challenges in being the first ones to do it there. But once we got open, it was really we had a great reception from the town and the local community. We tried very to become a part of the community and to do things that were conducive to inclusion and to just good vibes, and creating a positive place where people wanted to hang out. And it was fantastic. So that was like step one, was opening the brew pub, which is in San Juan del Sur, Nicaragua, which is kind of the busiest tourist beach town in the country. And certainly for any of your listeners, if you were gonna go to Nicaragua for the first time, I would say that's definitely should be on the top of your list. A lot of good hotels and beautiful beaches and restaurants and bars, etc. Um, so we opened the brew pub, and after a couple years of good growth and good results, we were ready for the next chapter, which was contracting the macro brewery in Nicaragua, the only brewery that existed before us, to help us with the production of one of our recipes on a larger scale to export to the U.S. And that's the Pang Drop stew that you encountered in the wild,
Yeah.
somewhere in Idaho, I guess. Um,
No, that
and
was actually in Oregon, but
oh, okay, okay.
yeah.
We do have a small presence in Idaho as well, but so that was that, and we launched that SKU in 2017, about 2.5 years after we opened the brew pub, um, and started self-distributing through a company called MHW that basically allows for that model in New York and California. Um, then we brought on Artisanal Imports as our full service importer and built a network of distributors across a much bigger footprint. So that's kind of the in a nutshell the story of Nicaragua Craft Beer Co.
So one of the challenges that I'm kind of like thinking about now is you create this place, you're trying to cater obviously to some locals but tourists at the same time, and
Right.
that's a hard thing to balance.
Yeah.
Are you the tourist place that all the locals don't want to go, or are you that local place that the tourists can't find? How do you
Right.
manage that?
Yeah, a really good question. So I think there's kind of two facets to it. One is well, there's the part of the Nicaraguan population that mostly lives in Managua, which is the capital city, and views San Juan del Sur as sort of like their weekend getaway place, where a lot of them have beach houses and whatever. This is the more affluent um, segment of the population. A lot of these people have gone to college in the United States, or even like high school, or have family there, and they have international exposure, which means not only uh, as I said, they have a little bit more disposable income to spend a little bit more on a beer, but they also had exposure to craft beer, given their travels. So for them, it was easy. They came to their beach getaway place, and they saw craft beer in their country for the first time, and they were really psyched about it. Um, for the people who were kind of more native to the coastal areas and grew up in San Juan del Sur or some of the other towns around there, who didn't have that international experience, this was a totally new concept. And also, they didn't have quite the disposable or they don't have quite the disposable income. I'm obviously generalizing right now, but
Sure, sure,
um,
sure.
that a lot of the people from Managua do. So for them, it was more about, okay, this is what craft beer is. you know, creating tours more in Spanish than in English, and doing tastings and walking through the process, and also creating events where we could bring down the price point of our beers, at least for one night, to open up some doors and open up some opportunities for people to try some beers. And also something that we did was that we a lot of people in San Juan del Sur, Nicaraguans, work in hospitality because tourism is so big there. So
Yeah.
we created an incentive where, that some of the surf instructors or tour guides or whatever, if they brought their groups in, comprised of foreigners, they would eat and drink for free. Um, so that would, obviously be good to bring groups into the brewery, but also be good for them to not, to be included in that event, and not just be sitting on the side wishing that they could
Yeah.
afford it, which is
Because
obviously nothing, yeah, that
just
we
the fact
wanted
that
to
you
be a
have a
part of.
brew pub there should be enough to bring people in. It's like, oh, we've got craft beer and something to eat. Let's go there. But you've also created that funnel of all those people that are going to do these activities. That's just part of the tour.
Exactly.
We're going to end up at the brewery. That sounds amazing
Yeah.
to me.
Exactly. And then, speaking of the tourist side of your question, that part was pretty simple because, most of the people visiting Nicaragua are coming from places where craft beers is pretty widespread and synonymous with, like, a fun day of doing cool stuff, right? So it's like you said, you go have your surf lesson, go fishing, come back and celebrate your adventure with a couple pints and some nachos or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I'm going to ask you to talk about now is I'd love to hear the differences between Nicaragua and Costa Rica,
Yeah.
culturally and experientially. But yeah, I think it's fairly safe to say, again, this is a broad generalization, but I think it's fairly safe to say that if anyone's going to travel there, um, I guess it could be on business. I'm sure you did that a few times, but I think most of the time it's going to be someone who needs to go on vacation, take a break. So they're probably going to surf or take surfing lessons, go spearfishing, go hiking, go birding. I knew a guy who was a voracious birder,
Yeah.
and Costa Rica was his mecca.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he checked off like half of his list right there in Costa Rica. Um, and and uh, and so the experience there. I mean, you already have this vacation euphoria happening. So
Right.
anything you eat or drink is just going to add to that. But
Totally.
but putting that aside,
Yeah.
how do you create this experience of coming to a place, getting a sense of place through the flavors, through the aesthetics, through just the circumstances of coming to that pub?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, another good question, and I think there's a lot of ways to answer that. And it, that's something that is an ongoing process. I think for us as a business is to continuing to develop our offering to create more and more better and better experiences for our customers. That are, again, like, representative of the place of origin. And I think as a brewery, the first and foremost, it starts with the styles of beer that you're brewing. So for us, there's no imperial stouts. We did one time we did a double IPA with the guy from Jeremy Tofty from Melvin Brewing came down. He's a
Okay,
big
yeah.
surfer, and they're famous for their double IPA. I think they had
And
won a couple of awards.
that's Wyoming, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Alpine. They started in Jackson, and then they moved to Alpine.
Right on.
So he snowboards and he surfs, and he came down to surf with us and brew a beer. So that was the only time we ever brewed a double IPA.
Hey, work trip.
Yeah, exactly. We called it El Melvin. And that turned out to be a great beer. And obviously it sold because it was a cool story and a unique thing. But generally speaking, for our flagships, we try to brew beers that are very appropriate for the climate, which is hot and, relatively dry. So lighter beers, fruitier notes, and something that you can really enjoy when you're on the beach or inside, but it's 85 degrees outside, and you're maybe you have a sunburn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that when we started the brewery, one of our so the styles is one thing, and then where we can utilizing local ingredients is another. So one of the beers that we've had a lot of success with, in both countries through both brands, is a passion fruit ale.
Oh
And the
yeah.
passion fruit, in Central America, is delicious. It's very tart, unlike some of the purees or whatever you might find in the U.S. that are, I think, have added sweeteners, and even if they're not, they're kind of like more fermented in the fruit by the time they're processed, so they're sweeter and less tart. Um, so we literally buy passion fruit from our friend's farm, and in the brewery, the team, sanitizes them, cuts each one open, scoops it out, and puts it in a sack, which then goes into the fermenter. So and the tartness of that fruit balances the hops so well, and creates this like incredibly just delicious flavor that is, again, just so intertwined with the whole area that you're in, and it's a really cool experience to drink that beer, you know 50 feet from the beach, in Nicaragua. So it's, the styles that we're brewing, utilizing these types of local ingredients where we can. And then I think, doing events, and creating a regular event schedule that also kind of play into what people like doing there and what makes being in a place like that so great. So, our busiest night of the week in the cerveceria in Nicaragua is open mic night on Wednesday nights. And it's an incredible draw because, you've got like a few of these expats that live in San Juan del Sur who are great musicians and don't have much of a chance to perform or to play. Um, and then you've got the random backpacker or family or whoever that's passing through town, and the mom or the daughter or the guy, are just happen to be these incredible musicians and who stumbled into this place on a Wednesday night. And you just get this cross reference, or this cross kind of like cultural experience, that where Nicaraguan musicians are playing with Americans, or playing with Canadians and Europeans, and it's just this like super cool, inclusive environment that really helps build the community. So, um, and then lastly, I know I've been talking for a while, but in Costa Rica, one of the things we do is the Ola del Mes, which is the wave of the month, and
Hmm.
it's a Instagram competition where surfers around the country will submit their best clip, the best wave that they caught, for the month, and tag the right pages or whatever, and that will submit them for a chance to win a cash prize for both them and their filmer. Um, and then we do a party at one of our accounts at the end of every month, where we screen the waves, and there's an MC who announces the winner, hands out the cash and the beer, and it's a really cool event. And it's exciting for the surfers and cool for the community. So it's a tapestry of different things that kind of build up to answering your question in terms of how do we create that experience. But yeah, that those are some of them.
Well, I'm grateful because you basically just described the end of my perfect day, and it starts with spearfishing and or surfing, probably a nap because I'm getting older, but then finishing out a day like that is it's so it but but it's particularly to have the opportunity to go to a place where you can commune with people from around the world because we're all travelers and all on that vacation euphoria. So everyone's your best friend, but as well as locals, and get to know people, get to know the place in a more intimate way than doing all the tourist traps. That's one of the
Totally.
issues I have with whether the times I've been Italy, Spain, or elsewhere. It's just like, I don't want to go to the places where everyone else is going to go. I still get a little embittered from 20 years ago going to Italy and seeing this incredible museum that everyone should go visit, and just down the road there's a McDonald's. I mean, it's in the
Yeah,
pictures.
yeah,
You can't avoid that in the pictures, and
yeah.
that's not the experience we want. It's that experience of communing with the experience that the place has to offer, but then getting to know the people and each other and sharing that authentically. That's just cool.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I would say that, again, talking to like why Nicaragua, and that's really the answer. Is what you just said.
So, one thing I do want to know is what is the food like in each respective place? Beer and food pairings is a really big deal to me and a lot of people. W- if I travel there, what can I expect to eat and drink and enjoy after this perfect day that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the cuisine in both places is really about accentuating the ingredients that are so clean and abundant. So you almost have to try to find processed food in those countries, which is again part of that whole Pura Vida lifestyle thing, at least as they describe it in Costa Rica. But you can expect some really fresh fish and ceviche. San Juan del Sur is, after all, a fishing village, and that's how it developed. And
Mm.
a block away from the brewery is a fishing port where the guys go out in their pangas and they bring back their catch every evening, and that's Panga Drops, the beer that we sell in the U.S. is gets its namesake from that, and a surf spot that's pretty well known actually. So yeah, definitely a lot of fresh fish, a lot of really good produce, rice and beans. The gallo pinto is a staple of actually 3 meals a day. Um, if you want it to be, it's rice and beans cooked in a really delicious way. And actually, Nicaraguans and Costa Ricans would actually fight each other over which is the more correct way to prepare the dish,
Mhm.
because it's a really passionate issue. Um, and something that I think both countries are really proud of. And yeah, I mean, again, it's just really about the freshness of the ingredients, and I would say that the the nuance of the dishes really gets to the particular establishment that you're going to, but what's consistent across the board is just again the quality and freshness of the ingredients.
It's funny. It kind of reminds me of again many years ago. My wife and I went to Belize, and we learned that there are two basically main dishes. There's rice and beans, and there's beans and rice that are they're totally different. Um, but I still remember, when I say it out loud, it sounds boring. It sounds like a staple. It sounds like forgettable. But when you have it done, and they had this particular spice blend that they'd put on the chicken, and that was served with like fried plantains, and
Yeah,
it was an incredible meal. I even got one of those spice packs and took it home with me to try and recreate it. And then I still think about it today, and it's been a decade
yeah,
and a half. It's crazy, but it's so good to just enjoy those flavors and get that sense of that regional flavor and just
totally.
and stick it in memory. I'll never forget it. It was incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we kind of touched on this a little bit too, but from your experience, not just within Nicaragua or Costa Rica, but your experiences, around the rest of the world, how do you define and how do you deliver the uh, uh, the experience of beer and food as opposed to just serving a meal?
Yeah, I mean, I think you sort of hit on this already, but it's really about for us. Look, so when we started the first brewery, it was really about seeking adventure and a fulfilled life, and that's what we really try to encapsulate in our products and in our experience at the brewery. So for us, the ideal day is spent on the water, surfing or fishing, working up a good appetite, and then earning the celebration at the end, over some beers and really fresh food. I think in terms
Yep.
of specifically what kind of food are we making, um, in talking about Nicaragua at the cerveceria, I would describe our menu there as like Southern barbecue meets Latin bar food. So we have a big smoker that lives in front of the brewery, and it's running like probably 4 days a week. doing pork shoulders, chicken, sausage, even fish sometimes, and that's a big part of like how we prepare our proteins there. And then using again a lot of those not really just fresh and local ingredients in terms of the produce, and putting let's say a little bit of a gringo spin on it, but being true to the place that we're in is really kind of where we kind of center with our food offering. And again, beers that are somewhat crushable and really clean and crisp and bright, are really what we go for with that.
Uh, and for all the beers, so I've found Panga Drops up here
Yeah.
in the U.S. What other beers from either brewery can you find in the U.S. or elsewhere? I mean, where are you distributing in total?
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of outside of Nicaragua and Costa Rica, we're only selling Panga Drops, and that
Okay.
is because it's a beer that we know can do well with the international freight, which is, frankly, like not a good thing for beer, as any of your listeners who like are beer people know it. The fresher the beer, the better. So we have been very deliberate in terms of brewing the right beer for export that can do better in that international voyage than most other offerings. And I think that like to sell an IPA brewed in Central America, in the US, it just doesn't make a ton of sense, because you're going to lose your hop character. There's probably, depending on how you're packaging it, over time you're going to get some oxidation. It's probably not going to be kept cold. So we brewed a pasteurized Keller Pilsner that's extremely clean and very bright and well suited for that journey. It's also something that the contract brewing facility could handle and handle well with the right nuance that was required. It's so I think international export, is it's a whole different beast. But in Costa Rica, where we have our own cold chain distribution, our four flagship beers are our tropical IPA, our beach lager, our offshore ale, which is an American wheat ale, and our passion fruit ale. And then we do a rotating IPA series as well, which is kind of like a mystery, a different recipe every time. We only brew it once until it sells out, and then you got to move on to the next one. Basically, we also do a
Yeah,
few seasonals there. In Nicaragua, we have rotating taps, but of course, those are only available in Nicaragua.
sure. That's interesting. I was going to ask you about that because, if you're going to ship an IPA from Nicaragua to the US where there's already a bazillion IPAs,
Yeah,
it either better be amazing or it better be like a tourist souvenir that people want to reminisce with or something like that, right?
totally. Yeah.
I'm not saying accused, but I talked about that with Garrett Marrero from Maui Brewing. It's like a lot of
Hmm.
his beers that shipping to the U.S. is just like I want to continue that island experience that I had, and so this is a
Right.
nice way to do it. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
but your decision to do a Keller pills, I was going to ask you about because a
Yeah.
Keller, authentic Keller, it's all about the green, fresh, not quite hitting their stride yet type of
Yeah.
flavors. But
Yeah.
but you just answered you're pasteurizing that.
That's right. Yeah. So we're basically, with that, we wanted to brew a style of beer that could really cast a wide net in terms of who can enjoy it.
Yeah,
And we find with the Keller Pills, it's a sort of a great in between in terms of being interesting to a beer person. It's a lager that you don't see a ton of still in the U.S. I think in the last year or two, I've seen more and more of them actually, which is great. But generally speaking, it's a lesser distributed style, and it's a fun one. And then for the kind of less beer geeky people, it's really crushable still, even though it's a slightly higher ABV than your typical lager.
yeah.
It's got a little bit of sweetness to it, not a whole lot of bitterness, and it's something that um, is not such a hard transition from a macro lager to a Keller Pils. So it was really for us, and then in terms of the can design, also trying to make it really inclusive, gender neutral colors. Like it's not overly aggressive or manly or feminine. It's yellow and blue, and we wanted something that could really just be hopefully attractive to a wider audience.
Well, I thought that one was particularly well done because the just the simple aesthetic on the can stands out on the shelf. The
Yeah,
size of the can is different, so it stands out on the shelf. For an old surfer like me, then just the imagery of that catered to me. It made me want to taste it because it's the marketers that sell the beer. It's the brewers that bring them back, right? And
that's
so that
right.
worked for
Yeah,
me. But then the beer nerd in me saw Keller Pills. Ooh, I got to try that. So
right,
it,
right.
it it fired on all cylinders for me, and hopefully it will for others too. But it's been some time since I found it, but I remember drinking it, enjoying the heck out of it. So well done there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's a yeah, and I guess lastly too, I should mention that the contract facility that we're working with on it is the brewmasters are German. It's partially owned by Heineken. So it's a beer that was very much in their wheelhouse to do. Of all of our recipes, one
So
that we
they
knew
know
that they
what
could
they're
do
doing.
really well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's why most of our beer we like to brew ourselves and distribute ourselves in within Central America. When you get into contract brewing, you have to be very very sure that your brewer is going to be aligned with your offering and with what you're trying to do as a brand. And I've definitely seen some mismatches in that area before, and I think it's something that gets overlooked sometimes when companies are thinking about how to scale.
Yeah. You find a similar problem with breweries who make an amazing Pilsner, again, in this example, because they have the water profile for that and they don't do anything else for the
Right.
water. And they're thinking, oh man, I win so many awards. I must be an amazing brewer. Let's brew an Irish stout. And it just doesn't come out the same way. So it's just being aware of, you know, the matching of the pairing of the people and the beer is also important too. So that's a good point you just brought up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, to to kind of start winding things down a little bit, I've got a little series of questions that I ask every guest. Uh, and because of your service to Nicaragua and Costa Rica in the beer world, tomorrow you get to be king of the beer world for a day. What is one thing that you would change about the beer world around the globe?
Oof, that's a tough one. Well, I would bring back the pale ale. I've been really upset with what's happened to my beloved style of pale ale. With the explosion of IPA everywhere, it's pretty much taken over pale ales and probably a lot of other styles as well. We keep
Hmm.
one on at the brew pub all the time because I think it's just a great crisp style of beer that a lot of people were brewing for a while. Um, and unfortunately, they lost the tug of war to the crazed hopheads. So on that note, I'm going to keep ranting, and I'm going to limit the number of hazies that any one brewery can brew because I don't think it's good for any of us.
It's the funny thing is that's not the first time I've heard that. So,
Yeah.
I love it. It's good to be the king. So at the end of that royal day of in the beer world, we are going to fly you anywhere in the world to have whatever you want to eat and whatever you want to drink. So, where would you go and what would you have?
Hmm. Um, okay. I think I'm gonna go down to Argentina for a traditional asado,
Oh,
and
yeah.
um, and I'm gonna pair that with a pale ale. Um, Actually, the
Way to
brewery
stay
down
true to
there,
that flag you planted
yeah,
in the sand.
exactly. The Patagonia brewery down there does a great one that I really like, and you got to have a little Malbec as well. While
Yeah,
when in Argentina.
do as the Argentinians do. Love it.
Exactly.
The next big question is kind of simple, kind of difficult, depends on you. But why does good beer matter so much to you?
Yeah, good beer matters to me because it's part of our mission in terms of living true to ourselves and authentically. We want to create a product that is aligned with those values. And I mean, look, I think it's easy to be a snob and to point fingers, especially when you're in this industry. But to do whatever you do with purpose and to do it, at a quality that you can be proud of, is really important in terms of having fulfillment in the way that you live. So, I guess I'll end it there. That's why it matters to me.
I love it. Fulfillment in life, to live out your purpose and do it well, and be good to other people, and hopefully surf and eat something nice that day too. Um,
Totally.
if things go well, there will be millions of people around the world that hear this and want to come flood your place. So anyone who's looking for you, anyone who wants to learn more or come visit eventually, where can they find you?
Yeah, so social media, Instagram at Papagayo Brewing or Nicaragua Craft Beer Co. Websites are the same, and yeah, you'll find all the info you need from there.
Excellent. And last thing, do you have any words of wisdom or any calls to action that you want to share with listeners?
Yeah, I guess I would say that if you ever find yourself on the precipice of one of these adventures, and your heart's telling you yes and your mind's telling you no, I would recommend that you go with yes, um, because it's what we did and we haven't looked back from there. And certainly grateful for the winding journey that decision has taken us on.
That is incredible advice. Thank you so much for putting this out in the world and sharing it with the world. And I certainly cannot wait to come visit in person someday. But thank you for coming on to the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and really look forward to seeing you down there.
Yeah. Cheers. The joy of the Pura Vida, or the good life, is sometimes just out of reach. In our fast-paced societies, I believe we need to find ways to cultivate more of it. Slowing down enough to taste good food and great beer, and to share it with loved ones, is the way. In the next episode, we head to the Netherlands, where an importer is infusing Dutch beer culture with American craft. I'm on a virtual tour of the craft and culture of beer around the globe. I've put Good Beer Matters on video so I can take you along for the ride. If you know of a person, a place, or a beer story that needs to be told, let me know. Meanwhile, grab a beer, hang out with friends, and let your world open up. Thank you for listening. Cheers.